representation of urban space and of modernity. And again, he talks a lot about the naked city. And then within that, talks about Luigi, the photographer, and how, who I had to look up, but he did a lot of these in the late 40s, black and white photography of New York, and how this kind of informed the noir style, or how New York is represented visually. And then a book by someone, Christopher, Somewhere in the Night. I've done a lot of skimming so far. And he talks about the spaces in noir, or the labyrinth of noir of the city. It's kind of three modes of the labyrinth, one being the actual physical map, and then this place where we run into all these different people, labyrinth, and then the labyrinth of the mind, I guess, the psychological puzzle of the character. So that's where I'm at with the research. I found some other stuff that I don't think I'm going to use, like more just auteurist, something on Jules Dassin, basically saying that he was a lefty. And yeah, and then one on Preminger, just talking about his European roots and expressionism. And then I've been trying to find stuff on the actual economy of New York at the time. Finding more about this kind of when the boom took place, which is around the 50s, early 50s. But I'm coming up short when I'm looking for something like actually 45 to 50.
You might be able to fill some of that in with stuff about the national economy, 45 to 50, and there's a kind of post-war slump a couple of years after the war and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff just gets written up in things like Tom Schatz's History of Post-War Hollywood that's widely anthologized. I forget the exact title, and that will have a bibliography entry to where he got his national data from, and you can sort of start there if you have trouble finding anything particular about New York. Can you tell us more about Gunning's thesis in the article? What's the title of the article?
Gunning is...
I'm just interested. That's why I'm pressing you.
Invisible Cities, Visible Cinema Illuminating Shadows in Late Film Noir. And I underlined his thesis. He says, I hope to show that the visible city shadows the invisible city, not simply as a formal device, but as an essential structure of our modern environment. So he talks about things like how, well, with Naked City, and he doesn't say this, but a lot of these films, they start off with these aerial views of the city, and then move down. And then, like within Naked City, we start out at night versus like Vertov or Rutman, thank you, where we start off in the morning. And there's this kind of animosity of the laborers at night, who aren't, their work isn't being rewarded because no one's around to see it.
So for Gunning, I'm just interested in Gunning right now because I mean that's probably very useful for your project in some way, or maybe, I mean, think about it. But so I've been thinking about Fritz Lang. Gunning in 2000 published a huge, like 500-page auteurist study that has a chapter on, I'm pretty sure, every Lang film and so on. So I read, a lot of it. And so for one thing, does he ever call those aerial shots topographic views? Does he use that phrase?
It sounds familiar.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Because he's very interested in that, and it's kind of interesting to me because the one thing about that book that one notices, or that I noticed, is that there's there's this kind of way in which modernity and the modern and sort of the ways of living that lead up to our ways of living, or ways of kind of organizing society that lead up to ours, are analyzed purely in terms of vision, right? So it makes sense that he would think that noir depicts, or certain wars depict, labor that happens at night unrewarded because nobody sees it, right? It's not part of kind of a specular field. Whereas, and sort of the problem with the book, for me, and maybe the problem with the article, is that the rewards and what drives society consists of being seen, stuff like surveillance or being seen in a way that acknowledges labor or something, rather than something more material like economic distribution. So it's weird, because in the Lang book he relies a lot on Benjamin, but it's the early Benjamin before the Marxism is really pronounced in Benjamin. And even though Zimmel is really important for both Benjamin and the Frankfurt School, for instance, Zimmel is Krakauer's teacher, right? So, and you can see that in the Krakauer. It's not even as materialist as the Zimmel that we read, right? So that's kind of because I know you're thinking about economics. I mean, you said you were looking for sources and so on. So there's that tension there around Tom's article that might be, that might be a point of engagement for you. You might decide to endorse it and move away from the economics, but you might also see a kind of problem there. Does he work with off-screen space?
I don't remember.
In that city that isn't there, because that's throughout his career, off-screen space is the point of interest for him, right? So what sort of, where does this interest in these noirs for you, what kind of bigger problems that interest you made you decide to choose that material?
Well, I was trying to find something that would tie into my thesis.
Right.
That's the more obvious. And this is the time frame I'm looking at, Force of Evil being one of those films. And then Dassin being one of those directors I'm looking at. As far as there's this, I'm also seeing this kind of shift in noir around this time. Mm-hmm. Which Schatz mentions in a book that I haven't used so far in this, but how there's this noir shift away from the private eye into more going back to police procedurals, mm-hmm. which I'm seeing in these more docu-noirs, and how this might be a way for directors to maybe play it safe. In the age of HUAC investigations and things like that. So that might be a way, I might, another avenue I might look at these films.
But talk to John, other people.
If I come across any stuff about the 1940s economics, do you want to
Yeah, that'd be great.
I've checked out a bunch of books in New York yesterday because I was snowed in over the weekend, but I haven't had a chance to really look through them yet. But I think some of them do go as far back as the 1940s.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. I'm finding stuff that's like 1950, which makes sense because that's when the boom really hit. But like this weird 45, 47 era, they just kind of say that it was bad then, but now kind of took off.
Other questions, interactions?
Is there any association with World War II at all, either in the city or in your project?
In other noir, there's a lot of this returning GI and this kind of disillusionment and pessimism. I'm not seeing it so much in these films, but Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with the economy at the time, but I'm assuming that, you know, with more GIs coming back, there was this need to start working
In Naked City, what kind of neighborhoods, I forget, or does the night work happen in? And in the documentary that I don't think I know that's in the gunning article.
Well, there's, they show Grand Central Station, and they show somebody mopping in the beginning. They show a DJ, and there's this voiceover. There's these weird voiceovers in some of these movies that aren't necessarily a character, that sound more like this kind of, like science film or something. And they speak for these characters, these kind of anonymous characters. So there's this DJ, and then the voiceover says, you know, that, is anybody listening? Something like that. So those are the two that I remember.
It might be, so one kind of economic question you might ask that might, I mean, this might not end up in the final thing, but it might be interesting to know and kind of not that hard to find out the details of. But so you've got a scene in Grand Central Station, and it's empty Grand Central Station, right? Because it's night workers. So that scene might have, depending on what was going on in New York, might have some relationship to the idea that so what year is Naked City?
It's 40, it might be 50?
Might be 50. So that might be around the right time. So there's a general idea that one of the things that happens in the United States to cities is that the GIs, the white GIs, come home, and there's this kind of imperative to have babies, right? And they want to have babies, but you know, in a highly sexually determined way. And so they marry and take their families out of the city centers, right? And that's called suburbanization sometimes, right? So the question is what stage of suburbanization is New York in at that time, right? And so can you read that shot of Grand Central Station as well as a shot of the kind of suburbanization and the increase in commuter traffic in New York, so that part of the reason why somebody would show empty midnight or late night Grand Central Station and the work of mopping it isn't just that it's this sort of unseen labor, right, but that that space has a sort of, might have a different importance. If I sort of, is that, you're from New York, right? Is that, does the Long Island Railroad go to Grand Central, or is that on the west side? Station. That's what I thought. But there is some kind of railroad
that goes to Grand?
To Grand, isn't there, or is that all subways?
Subway lines.
It's all subway lines? Anyways, finding out stuff like that would be...
and there is a character in the suburbs with the small child.
There is a character in the suburbs with the small child. So that's a constellation that might be interesting. Anything else for John?
Well, how is New York different than like other cities around that same time?
Well, noir usually gets associated with LA. So how is it different? It's, well, with these films, we always enter entering the film with these aerial views and then talking about, you know, this city with all these people. Where a lot of LA noir, they seem to focus on individuals first and then show how they maneuver within the city. Where these showcase the city first and then kind of show how these people are trapped in this maze, and then again presenting this grand place of, you know, great opportunity and great danger.
John?
Okay.
The other John? Jonathan? Should I call you John or Jonathan? I never know.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right. I guess to start off, I've been mostly gathering a lot of sources as of now. I found a lot of pretty interesting book sources. Some of them, some of which have been in a library, some of which I might have to do interlibrary loan or what have you. Probably the best source I have right now is called City of Courts, and it's a